What if I told you that some of the most powerful healing plants on Earth aren't locked away in pharmaceutical labs or exotic rainforests, but written plainly in one of the oldest books ever recorded, and growing wild in fields most of us walk past without a second glance? Most people don't know this, but while we're all lining up for synthetic supplements and patented prescriptions, the ancient world had already solved half of what ails us. The people who wrote the Bible weren't just spiritually sophisticated, they were botanically brilliant. They lived among a pharmacy that had been tested for thousands of years, refined across generations, and passed down through every healing tradition the ancient Near East ever produced. And somehow in the last 100 years or so, we decided we knew better. Stick around because number 17 on this list is a thorny little desert shrub called hyssop. And when researchers tested its essential oil extract against a hospital-acquired bacterial strain resistant to conventional antibiotics, it didn't just hold its own, it won. The ancient Israelites weren't being poetic when they called it the Great Purifier. They were being accurate. And number 20 I saved this one for last because it doesn't just heal the body. It reframes everything we think we know about what healing even means. The ancients had a word for it that translates somewhere between medicine and miracle. And once you hear what modern researchers have found inside this single plant, you'll understand why. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because we post new videos every week that go deep into the natural world. Plants, remedies, forgotten traditions, and the science that keeps vindicating all of it. This is the knowledge that used to be common and somehow became radical. So, let's get into it. Here are 20 biblical herbs that will heal your body and soul. Ranked from remarkable to absolutely miraculous. Number 1, calendula, the war flower. Long before it was a boutique ingredient in artisan skincare, calendula was a battlefield herb. Roman soldiers packed it into wounds to stop bleeding and prevent the kind of infections that turned minor injuries into death sentences. Medieval physicians called it the herb of the sun and believed it could draw poison out of a wound simply by contact with the skin. They weren't entirely wrong. Calendula officinalis, to give it its proper scientific name, contains a dense array of triterpenoid saponins, flavonoids, and carotenoids, compounds that work in concert to reduce inflammation, speed tissue repair, and inhibit microbial growth. Modern research confirms what the ancients intuited. A 2009 clinical trial published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology found that calendula cream significantly outperformed standard aloe vera in preventing acute dermatitis during radiation therapy. Here's how it was used in biblical-era medicine. Crushed petals were applied directly to wounds, infused in oil to treat skin diseases, and brewed into a tea to address digestive inflammation and liver complaints. In Hebrew folk medicine, it was used in preparations for treating eye infections, a practice now validated by its documented antimicrobial activity against Staphylococcus aureus. It fell out of mainstream use almost entirely when petroleum-based creams became cheap and easy to manufacture. Why grow a flower in your garden when a tube from a factory could replace it? That was the logic. It was wrong. Think of calendula as the field medic of the plant kingdom. Quiet, unglamorous, and more effective under pressure than anyone gives it credit for. Number 2, fenugreek, the forgotten feast. Here's something almost nobody knows. Fenugreek was so prized in ancient Egypt that they placed it in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Not gold, not jewels, fenugreek seeds. That tells you something about the way these people valued plants. Trigonella phoenum graecum appears throughout biblical-era records as both a culinary staple and a medicine. It was used by Hebrew midwives to ease labor, by Greek physicians to reduce fever, and by Arab traders who believed it balanced the four humors better than almost anything else in their pharmacopoeia. This was a plant that crossed every cultural boundary in the ancient world because it worked across every system in the body. Modern science has caught up. Fenugreek seeds are rich in a compound called 4-hydroxyasoleucine, an unusual amino acid that has been shown in multiple clinical trials to lower fasting blood glucose and improve insulin sensitivity. A 2009 study found that type 2 diabetic patients who supplemented with fenugreek seed extract experienced a 25% reduction in blood sugar levels over a 12-week period. The seeds are also dense with diosgenin, a steroidal saponin that has demonstrated estrogen-modulating effects, which explains why midwives were reaching for it first. Traditional uses included grinding the seeds into a paste to treat skin inflammation, boiling them to produce a tonic for respiratory congestion, and adding them to bread during times of illness to sustain body strength. It was pushed aside partly by the rise of diabetes pharmaceuticals, and partly because it smells unmistakably like maple syrup, which apparently wasn't taken seriously enough in clinical settings for decades. Think of fenugreek as the unassuming seed that carries medicine inside a kitchen spice, waiting for someone curious enough to look twice. Number 3. Wormwood, the bitter physician. Few plants in the biblical world carried as much symbolic weight as wormwood. It appears in the book of Proverbs as a metaphor for the bitterness of sin and consequence. In Lamentations, it represents suffering. And yet, the same plant the ancient writers used to describe the worst of human experience was simultaneously one of their most powerful medicines. Artemisia absinthium has a documented history of use stretching back to ancient Egypt, where the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts, references its use against intestinal parasites. And that is exactly what modern pharmacology has confirmed it does. The compound artemisinin, derived from a related species, Artemisia annua, became the foundation of the most effective anti-malarial drug of the 20th century. Tu Youyou won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2015 for that discovery, a discovery she traced back to a 1,600-year-old Chinese medical text, the same lineage of knowledge that the biblical world also drew from. Traditional use included brewing strong wormwood tea to expel intestinal worms, applying it topically for joint pain, and using it as a bitter digestive tonic after heavy meals. Here's why it disappeared. It became associated almost exclusively with absinthe, the highly alcoholic liqueur that was blamed for everything from hallucinations to moral collapse in 19th century Europe. The plant was scapegoated for what humans did with it in excess. The healing compound got buried under the scandal. Think of wormwood as the plant the world punished for being too powerful, bitter on the tongue and brilliant in the body. Number 4. Coriander, the manna herb. When the Israelites wandered in the desert and encountered manna, the miraculous food that sustained them, the book of Exodus describes its appearance as being like coriander seed, white. That comparison wasn't random. Coriander was one of the most familiar plants in the ancient world, found in Egyptian tomb offerings, referenced in Sanskrit texts over 7,000 years old, and grown in the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Coriandrum sativum is the plant we know today as cilantro in its leaf form and coriander in its seed form. It is a single plant with 2 lives, and both of them are medicinally active. The seeds contain linalool, a terpene alcohol with documented anxiolytic, that is, anti-anxiety properties. A 2019 study from the University of California found that linalool reduced anxiety markers in mice at doses equivalent to a few tablespoons of seeds in a human diet, without the sedative side effects of pharmaceutical alternatives. Here's how it was used in the ancient world. The seeds were ground and applied to arthritic joints as an anti-inflammatory poultice. The leaves were brewed into a tea for digestive upset, and across multiple ancient cultures, the seeds were eaten before sleep as a mild sedative, the biblical era equivalent of a natural sleep aid. The rise of processed food culture sidelined it into garnish territory. It became the herb people either love or genetically hate the taste of, rather than the medicine it had always been. Think of coriander as the flavor in the corner of your plate that used to be the point of the entire meal. Number 5. Black cumin, the seed of blessing. The Prophet Muhammad, according to hadith recorded in Sahih Bukhari, said that black seed has a remedy for every disease except death. That is not a small claim, and it is repeated across multiple ancient medical traditions, in a way that suggests it wasn't religious hyperbole. It was clinical observation passed through a spiritual lens. Nigella sativa, known as black cumin or black seed, appears in the Hebrew Bible as Quetzah. It was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. It was mentioned by the ancient Greek physician Dioscorides as a treatment for headaches, nasal congestion, and toothache. And modern research has now cataloged over 650 peer-reviewed studies on this single plant. Modern science has caught up in a dramatic way. Thymoquinone, the primary active compound in black seed oil, has demonstrated anti-tumor, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and immunomodulatory effects in laboratory and clinical settings. A 2014 meta-analysis found significant reductions in fasting blood glucose among patients supplementing with Nigella sativa extract. A separate series of studies found it reduced markers of rheumatoid arthritis severity comparably to conventional disease-modifying drugs without the associated side effects. Traditional use included pressing the seeds into oil for respiratory conditions, applying the oil to the scalp for hair thinning, and consuming the seeds whole to address digestive complaints. It was eclipsed almost entirely by the pharmaceutical industry's inability to isolate and patent thymoquinone at profitable scale. The whole seed works better than the extract, and you cannot patent a seed. Think of black cumin as the pharmacy that refused to be bought and kept quietly working long after everyone stopped paying attention. Number 6. Aloe vera, the silent healer of empires. Cleopatra reportedly attributed her famous skin to 2 things: milk baths and aloe vera gel. The ancient Egyptians called it the plant of immortality, and when Alexander the Great conquered the island of Socotra in the Indian Ocean, specifically to secure its aloe supply for his wounded soldiers, you begin to understand that this was not just a houseplant. This was a military asset. Aloe barbadensis Miller appears in the biblical world most directly in the Song of Solomon, where it is listed among the finest perfumes and aromatic plants. It also appears in the Gospel of John, where Nicodemus brings a mixture of myrrh and aloes to prepare Jesus' body for burial, in quantities described as about 100 pounds, suggesting these were not casual garden herbs but precious medicines treated with the gravity of liturgy. Here's what modern analysis shows. Aloe gel contains asamenin, a complex polysaccharide that activates macrophages, the immune system's primary cleanup crew, and accelerates wound healing at the cellular level. Research published in the Annals of Burns and Fire Disasters demonstrated that aloe vera significantly accelerated first and second-degree burn recovery compared to conventional silver sulfadiazine cream. Traditional uses included applying the gel directly to burns, wounds, and skin diseases, drinking the inner leaf juice to treat constipation and stomach inflammation, and using it as a preservative in medicinal preparations. It was so thoroughly reduced to a cosmetic ingredient that most people stopped thinking of it as medicine entirely. The pharmaceutical industry didn't need to replace it, it just needed to rebrand it into irrelevance. Think of aloe as the plant that has been saving skin since before civilization had a word for sunscreen. Number 7. Myrrh, the medicine wrapped in sacrament. 3 magi carried it, it anointed kings, it was used to prepare the dead. And somewhere between all of that sacred symbolism, we forgot that myrrh was first and foremost a medicine, one of the most potent antiseptic and anti-inflammatory substances available to the ancient world. Commiphora myrrha is a thorny, scrubby tree native to the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. It produces a resin, the myrrh we know, when the bark is cut. The ancient Egyptians used it in embalming precisely because of its antimicrobial properties. It slowed decomposition by killing the bacteria responsible for it. Hebrew priests burned it in the temple as part of the sacred incense blend called keto red, which ancient sources describe as producing dense, purifying smoke. Fumigation was, and remains, a legitimate method of disinfection. Modern science has caught up completely. Research confirms that myrrh resin contains sesquiterpenes and furanodiene compounds that exhibit anti-inflammatory activity comparable to NSAIDs. A 2000 study published in Planta Medica found that myrrh extract demonstrated significant analgesic, pain-relieving effects in animal models, working through pathways distinct from conventional painkillers. Traditional use included applying dissolved myrrh resin to wounds and gum disease, using it as a mouthwash for oral infections, and drinking small quantities in wine as a pain reliever before surgical procedures. The original local anesthetic. It disappeared from medicine when synthetic analgesics arrived, and the sacred associations made clinicians uncomfortable working with it as a pharmaceutical. Think of myrrh as the medicine that got dressed in religion and was never quite undressed again, until the chemists finally looked inside. Number 8. Frankincense, the mind-altering anti-inflammatory. Frankincense is having a comeback, and once you understand the mechanism, it makes perfect sense. But for most of the last 2 centuries, it was dismissed entirely as incense. The smell of church, nothing more. Boswellia sacra produces the resin known as frankincense, and it was among the most valuable trade commodities in the ancient world. The frankincense road connected the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean, generating wealth that funded civilizations. In the Hebrew Bible, it was a component of the sacred temple incense and was used in grain offerings. In Egypt, it was burned in temples and hospitals. And yes, those were often the same building. Here's what researchers discovered when they finally looked. Frankincense resin, when burned, releases a compound called the incensol acetate, which has been shown to activate ion channels in the brain associated with emotional regulation and the relief of anxiety and depression. This is not metaphor. Researchers at Johns Hopkins and Hebrew University demonstrated this in 2008, calling it a previously unknown psychoactive compound. Ancient peoples built their sacred spaces around this smoke, and it was actually doing something to their minds, calming them, opening them, reducing the physiological markers of fear and grief. Topically and orally, boswellic acids have demonstrated powerful anti-arthritic effects. Multiple clinical trials show significant reduction in joint pain and swelling in osteoarthritis patients supplementing with boswellia extract. Traditional uses included burning it during healing rituals, applying the resin to skin conditions, and drinking small dilutions to address digestive inflammation. Think of frankincense as the original therapy session. The ancient world knew you couldn't heal the body while the mind was on fire. Number 9, mint, the everyday miracle hiding in plain sight. Mint is so common that its power has been hiding behind its familiarity for centuries. We put it in gum, in toothpaste, in cocktails, and in doing so, we completely buried what it actually does. Tells us something important. Mint tells us something important. Mint was common enough that even ordinary households kept it, and valuable enough that it was considered a tithable crop. This was not a garnish, this was a household medicine. Mentha piperita, peppermint specifically, contains menthol and menthone as its primary active compounds. Research now shows that peppermint oil is one of the most effective treatments for irritable bowel syndrome available, including pharmaceutical options. A 2014 meta-analysis in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology found that enteric-coated peppermint oil capsules outperformed placebos and performed comparably to antispasmodic drugs in reducing IBS symptoms without side effects. Separately, topical application of diluted peppermint oil to the forehead was shown in a controlled study to be as effective as 1,000 milligrams of acetaminophen for tension headache relief. Traditional uses included brewing mint tea for nausea and stomach upset, applying fresh leaves to the temples for headaches, and using it in chest preparations for respiratory congestion. It was overlooked not because it stopped working, but because it became too cheap and too ordinary to take seriously. Think of mint as the medicine that got demoted to a flavor, still doing its job while nobody's watching. Number 10, pomegranate, the fruit of kings and arteries. The pomegranate was embroidered onto the hem of the high priest's robe in ancient Israel. It decorated the capitals of Solomon's temple. It appeared on ancient coins, in ceremonial art, and in bridal traditions across multiple Mediterranean cultures. This was the most symbolically loaded fruit in the biblical world, and the ancients understood instinctively that something this beautiful had to be doing something extraordinary. Punica granatum is almost aggressively generous in its chemistry. The fruit contains punica ligands, antioxidant compounds so potent that pomegranate juice has been shown to have 3 times the antioxidant activity of red wine and green tea combined. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrated that regular pomegranate juice consumption reduced carotid artery plaque progression by up to 30% over a 3-year period in patients with cardiovascular disease risk factors. Another clinical trial found significant reductions in systolic blood pressure among patients drinking 150 milliliters of pomegranate juice daily. Traditional uses included consuming the seeds and juice to address heart complaints, using the rind as an astringent to treat diarrhea and dysentery, and applying the crushed flowers to stop bleeding and treat inflammation of the gums. It was pushed out of mainstream medicine simply because you cannot make exclusive money from a fruit anyone can grow. The pomegranate refused to be patented, and so it was quietly reclassified as food. Think of the pomegranate as the temple medicine hiding in plain sight, a fruit so layered with healing chemistry that the ancients literally sewed it into their sacred clothing to keep it close. Now, if you're finding this valuable and you're starting to realize just how much healing knowledge has been hiding in plain sight, written into ancient texts, growing in ordinary gardens, and waiting for modern science to finally validate what people knew thousands of years ago, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps this video reach other people who are looking for this exact kind of knowledge. People who are tired of being told that wellness began in 1990 and requires a monthly subscription. And if you haven't subscribed to the Garden Path yet, click that subscribe button and ring the bell. We're building a community of genuinely curious, deeply empowered people who believe that the natural world has more to offer than we've been led to think. And I'd love to have you as part of it. All right, let's keep going because we're just getting to the really amazing ones. Number 11. Saffron, the golden antidepressant. A single gram of saffron costs more than a gram of gold in some markets. It has been that way for thousands of years. The ancient world knew, even without the vocabulary to explain it, that what saffron did to the human mind was worth any price. Crocus sativus is referenced in the Song of Solomon, alongside myrrh and frankincense as one of the most precious aromatic plants known. In Persian medicine, it was prescribed for melancholy, what we now call depression. Egyptian physicians used it for menstrual complaints. Greek physicians gave it to patients recovering from grief and trauma. Modern science has confirmed the instinct with startling precision. Crocan and safranal, the two primary active compounds in saffron, have been shown in multiple, randomized controlled trials to produce antidepressant effects comparable to fluoxetine and imipramine, two of the most widely prescribed pharmaceutical antidepressants in the world. A 2005 study published in Phytotherapy Research found saffron extract to be as effective as fluoxetine at the standard 20 mg dose for treating mild to moderate depression, with no significant adverse effects. Traditional uses included steeping saffron threads in warm water or milk to treat anxiety and low mood, applying saffron-infused oil to the skin for pain, and using it as a menstrual regulator. It was sidelined from clinical medicine not because it doesn't work, but because the antidepressant pharmaceutical industry is worth over $15 billion a year. There is no financial incentive to tell you that a plant has solved the problem. Think of saffron as the golden thread of joy, something the ancient world wove into their medicine exactly because they understood that the soul and the body are not separate patients. Number 12, cedar of Lebanon, the wood that heals. Most people think of cedar as furniture or closets. The ancient world thought of it as resurrection. The cedar of Lebanon, Cedrus libani, was so important to the biblical world that it appears in the Old Testament over 70 times. Solomon imported cedar wood at enormous cost to build the temple in Jerusalem. The Psalms describe the righteous person flourishing like a cedar in Lebanon. But what the ancients were responding to wasn't just the majesty of the tree. Cedar wood and its oil contain a compound called cedrol, a sesquiterpene alcohol that is now understood to have sedative, anxiolytic, and anti-inflammatory properties. Cedrol has been shown in pharmacological research to reduce locomotor activity and enhance slow-wave sleep through interaction with GABA receptors, the same receptors targeted by pharmaceutical sedatives like benzodiazepines. The Egyptians used cedar oil in embalming, but they also used it as a medicinal inhalant for respiratory conditions, burning shavings to produce aromatic smoke that patients breathed in for lung complaints. Research supports that cedrol has genuine bronchodilatory effects. Traditional uses also included applying cedar oil to skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis, using it as a topical antifungal, and incorporating cedar wood in spaces where healing was meant to occur. It was lost from medicine when timber became industry. The cedar forest became an economic resource, and the healing properties were stripped away with the bark. Think of cedar as the tree that held up a temple because it was already holding up the people inside it. Number 13, mandrake, the dangerous root of desire. Mandrake is perhaps the most misunderstood plant in the biblical world. When Rachel bargains with Leah for mandrakes in the book of Genesis, trading her husband's company for a basket of roots, modern readers see folk superstition. The ancient world saw pharmaceutical negotiation. Mandragora officinarum contains tropane alkaloids, atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine, compounds that are still used in modern medicine today. Atropine is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. Scopolamine is prescribed for motion sickness and nausea. These are not mild compounds. In the doses the ancients used, mandrake functioned as an anesthetic, a sedative, and in some preparations, a hallucinogen. Ancient surgeons, including those described by the Greek physician Dioscorides, used mandrake wine as a surgical anesthetic. Patients were given a drink, rendered unconscious, operated on, and woken again. This was the world's first general anesthetic, and it was built from a plant. The ancients understood, by long empirical practice, exactly what dose produced unconsciousness versus what dose produced death. Traditional uses also included applying the root poultice to arthritic joints, using small quantities as a sleep aid, and the belief, now partially validated, that it had fertility-supporting properties related to its estrogenic alkaloid activity. It was pushed out of medicine when synthetic anesthetic compounds could be manufactured at predictable doses. The plant was too variable, but the compounds extracted from it never left. Think of mandrake as the root that taught surgery what sleep felt like, the ancient world's most dangerous and most essential pharmaceutical secret. Number 14, flaxseed, the Omega Foundation. Flax is one of the oldest cultivated plants in human history, and the biblical world grew it for two reasons: linen and medicine. The same plant that clothed the ancient world was also feeding it, healing it, and keeping its hearts beating. Linum usitatissimum, and the name means most useful linen, appears in the Bible as a critical agricultural crop. The Hebrew midwives hid spies under stalks of flax drying on Rahab's rooftop. Egyptian priests wore only linen, harvested from flax as a mark of purity. But the seeds are the medicine. Flax seeds are the richest plant-based source of alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 fatty acid that serves as the precursor to EPA and DHA, the compounds your brain is literally made of. They are also the world's richest source of lignans, phytoestrogens with documented anti-cancer properties. A landmark study from the University of Toronto found that flaxseed supplementation significantly significantly slowed the growth of breast cancer tumors in human subjects awaiting surgery, a finding so striking it prompted multiple follow-up trials. Traditional uses included grinding the seeds to make poultices for drawing out infection, drinking flaxseed water for sore throats and respiratory congestion, and consuming the oil as a general tonic for dry skin and inflammation. Flaxseed disappeared from the center of the diet when refined grain products and seed oils took over food processing. It was ground out of the flour and forgotten. Think of flax as the cloth that also happened to be a cardiovascular rescue, the most useful plant that humans somehow learned to use for everything except what it does best. Number 15. Anise, the digestive architect. In the same gospel passage that names mint and cumin as tithable crops, anise, or dill, depending on the translation, appears alongside them. This was a spice so ordinary and so universal that Jesus used it as a symbol of the smallest, most mundane thing a person might own. And yet, what anise does to the human digestive system is anything but small. Pimpinella anisum contains trans-anethol as its dominant compound, which accounts for the distinctive licorice aroma and most of the medicinal activity. Trans-anethol has demonstrated antimicrobial properties against a wide range of bacteria and fungi. It also functions as an antispasmodic, relaxing the smooth muscle of the gastrointestinal tract, which is exactly why anise tea has been used for infant colic, adult bloating, and intestinal cramping across virtually every medical tradition in the ancient world. A study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that anise seed extract significantly reduced the severity and frequency of menstrual cramps in young women, performing comparably to pharmaceutical antispasmodics. Traditional uses included brewing anise tea for infants with colic and gas, using it as a breath freshener after illness, applying anise oil to the chest for respiratory congestion, and incorporating it into preparations for toothache. It was sidelined partly because its flavor was so familiar, licorice adjacent, sweet, homey, that it seemed like a confection rather than a cure. When medicine became serious, anise was left in the candy aisle. Think of anise as the spice that kept the ancient world comfortable in its body, the quiet diplomat between the gut and the nervous system. Number 16. Garlic, the antibiotic that history already tested. Garlic has one of the most thoroughly documented medicinal histories of any plant on Earth. Egyptian papyri detail its use. The Talmud recommends it. The ancient Greeks fed it to athletes before competition. Roman soldiers ate it daily as a matter of military regulation. When workers building the Great Pyramid went on strike, the first recorded labor dispute in history, one of their demands was the restoration of their garlic ration. Allium sativum produces a compound called allicin when the raw clove is crushed. And allicin is one of the most potent, naturally occurring antimicrobial substances ever documented. It has demonstrated broad-spectrum antibacterial activity against pathogens, including Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and E. coli, as well as antifungal activity against Candida species. A study published in Advances in Therapy found that subjects taking a daily allicin supplement had 63% fewer colds over a 12-week period than the placebo group, and when they did catch colds, recovery time was reduced by 70%. Here's how it was used. Raw cloves were applied to infected wounds. Garlic preparations were consumed to treat intestinal parasites. The juice was dropped into infected ears. It was used as a fumigant in sick rooms, and it fell out of clinical favor almost entirely because you cannot smell garlic and take it seriously in a sterile modern context. The pharmaceutical industry presented cleanliness as odorlessness, and garlic failed the smell test. Think of garlic as the antibiotic that has been field tested for 5,000 years and never once failed to show up. Number 17. Hyssop, the purifier they couldn't explain. Here it is, the one I promised you at the beginning. Hyssop appears more than any other plant in the biblical purification rituals. It was used to apply the blood of the Passover lamb to the doorposts. Moses commanded it. David in Psalm 51 cries out, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." It was the herb held up to Jesus at the crucifixion on a sponge soaked in vinegar. This plant is everywhere in the most sacred moments of the entire biblical narrative, and the word most consistently associated with it is one, clean, Hyssopus officinalis. And when you look at what is inside it, the word clean makes perfect biochemical sense. Hyssop contains pinocamphone and isopinocamphone, volatile monoterpene ketones, along with a rich flavonoid content including diosmin, which has documented venous and capillary protective effects. But the headline finding is this: hyssop essential oil was tested in a 2016 study against multiple strains of bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus and MRSA, the hospital-acquired superbug that has become resistant to most conventional antibiotics. Hyssop oil demonstrated significant inhibitory activity against these strains. Against MRSA specifically, the plant the ancient world used for purification was, in the most literal sense, anti-infective. Traditional uses included burning hyssop and and breathing the smoke to treat respiratory infections, applying it in a compress to bruises and muscular pain, and using hyssop-infused water in ritual washing that served a dual purpose: spiritual cleansing and genuine microbial decontamination. It was forgotten partly because it's difficult to standardize and partly because the whole category of ritual purification was dismissed as religion rather than examined as empirical public health practice. It was both. It was always both. Think of hyssop as the plant that carried God's instructions for hygiene and turned out to be so precisely correct that a modern laboratory needed a microscope to finally catch up with a 2,000-year-old psalm. Number 18, cumin, the medicine in the spice rack. Cumin is the third herb named in that gospel passage about tithing, and the fact that Jesus mentions it in the same breath as mint and anise tells you it was a kitchen staple, present in ordinary homes, used daily, unremarkable by familiarity. Cuminum simonum originated in the Middle East and was documented in Egyptian medical papyri as far back as 1550 BCE. It appears in biblical texts as a cultivated crop significant enough to be subject to religious law. The ancient Romans used it so extensively as a pepper substitute that it became slang for miserliness. A cumin splitter was the Roman equivalent of a penny pincher. Modern analysis has revealed that cumin seeds contain cuminaldehyde, a compound with documented antibacterial, antifungal, and larvicidal properties. More significantly, research has shown that cumin has meaningful effects on metabolic health. A study published in the Complementary Therapies in Clinical Practice journal found that overweight participants who consumed cumin powder daily for 3 months lost significantly more body fat than the control group, with measurable reductions in triglycerides and LDL cholesterol. Traditional uses included grinding cumin seeds into a paste for wound treatment, brewing them into a digestive tea, and incorporating them into preparations for chest congestion and respiratory infection. Cumin was sidelined from medicine simply by being too embedded in cuisine. It stopped being seen as therapeutic the moment it became delicious. Think of cumin as the prescription your grandmother mixed into dinner, the medicine that survived by tasting good enough that nobody ever stopped eating it. Number 19, bitter herbs, the collective genius of the Passover table. The Passover Seder requires bitter herbs, maror, by explicit divine instruction. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Most people, if they think about this at all, interpret it as symbolic. The bitterness of slavery, the bitterness of suffering. And that reading is real, but it is not the only reading. The plants historically used as maror include horseradish, endive, chicory, and romaine lettuce, all of them belonging to the bitter-tasting category that herbalists call bitters, a class of plants defined by their ability to stimulate bile production, activate the liver, and jumpstart the digestive system. When you eat a large ritual meal of roasted meat, as the Passover feast prescribes, you need exactly this. You need your liver activated, your bile flowing, your digestion firing on all cylinders. Horseradish, Armoracia rusticana, contains glucosinolates and isothiocyanates, the same class of compounds found in cruciferous vegetables that have demonstrated anti-cancer activity in multiple cell studies. Chicory, Sicorium intybus, contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria of the gut microbiome. Endive and romaine contain lactocin and lactocopicrine, bitter sesquiterpene lactonase with documented analgesic and sedative properties. In other words, the ancient instruction to eat bitter herbs was simultaneously a spiritual ritual and a pharmacological protocol. The Passover table was a prescription written by someone who understood the body as well as the soul. Think of the bitter herbs as the world's oldest functional food requirement, the moment when religious law and nutritional science arrived at the exact same table and ordered the same thing. And here we are at number 20, the one I saved for last because it represents everything we've talked about today. Number 20, olive, the tree that holds everything together. The olive tree is not just a plant in the biblical world, it is the central image of the entire covenant. When Noah's dove returned with an olive branch, it signified the end of judgment and the beginning of restoration. The Hebrew word for anointed, from which we get Messiah and Christ, means literally to be rubbed with oil. Kings were anointed with olive oil. The sick were anointed with olive oil. The temple menorah burned olive oil. The dying received olive oil as the final sacrament. There is no substance more woven into the sacred fabric of the biblical world than the oil pressed from this one tree, Olea europaea. And here is what it contains. Oleocanthal, a phenolic compound present in extra virgin olive oil, has been shown to inhibit the same inflammatory pathways as ibuprofen at comparable efficacy without gastrointestinal side effects. This was documented in a landmark 2005 paper in Nature by researcher Gary Beauchamp, who identified the compound after noticing that fresh olive oil caused the same throat sting sensation as liquid ibuprofen, a deliberately engineered pharmacological signature. Hydroxytyrosol, another phenolic in olive oil, has demonstrated among the highest antioxidant activity of any compound found in food, with documented protective effects on LDL cholesterol oxidation, which is the mechanism by which arterial plaques form and cardiovascular disease develops. Oleuropein, found in the olive leaf rather than the oil, has documented antiviral, antibacterial, and antihypertensive properties. Research published in Phytomedicine found that olive leaf extract produced significant reductions in blood pressure comparable to the pharmaceutical drug captopril, a standard ACE inhibitor. And this is where it comes together. The ancient world did not separate the olive tree's sacred meaning from its medical utility. They did not have a word for that distinction. The same oil that anointed the king also dressed his wounds. The same tree that shaded the prophet also provided the lamp that let him read through the night. The olive tree was not medicine or sacrament. It was both, simultaneously, as if the distinction were the confusion. Traditional uses included drinking olive oil as a laxative and digestive soother, applying it to wounds, burns, and dry skin, using the leaves in fever reduction preparations, and burning the oil in sacred spaces as a purifying light. It fell out of serious medical discussion for one reason: it is too common to monetize. You cannot patent an olive tree, you cannot charge hospital prices for an ingredient in salad dressing. And so the system quietly reclassified it as food, stripped it of its therapeutic vocabulary, and left it there, still working, still healing, still pressing its oil in the same ancient way it always has. The olive tree is the thesis of everything we have explored today. These 20 plants were not accidents of geography or kitchen habit. They were the product of thousands of years of careful human observation, tested on living bodies, refined through generations, written into sacred texts because the people who use them understood that the line between healing and holiness is not a line at all. It is an invitation. The ancient world is calling you back to your own garden. The question is whether you are finally willing to listen. If this changed how you see the plants around you, hit that like button. It helps more people find their way to the garden path. Drop a comment. Are you team olive oil, team black seed, or team hyssop? I want to know what you're taking home from this list. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next, because we are just getting started. The ancient world planted this knowledge for us. It's time we grew it.